You open your fridge tonight without thinking about it. Milk, leftovers, something frozen you forgot you bought. It takes 4 seconds and zero risk. You do not calculate whether that food might kill you. You do not wonder if it will still be there tomorrow. You just take it. Now imagine that fridge is gone. No fridge, no store, no plan B, no neighbor to ask, no app to check, no label telling you what is safe. You have just landed 50,000 years ago, and your stomach does not care what century you came from. It wants food today, and it will start sending you increasingly urgent signals within hours. So what would you actually eat? Most people imagine some version of a caveman movie. A spear, a fire, a dead animal dragged back to camp while everyone cheers. That image is comforting because it is simple. It is also almost entirely wrong. The real answer is far stranger, far more delicate, and far more dependent on knowledge than muscle than hunt a mammoth. Here is the first thing you need to unlearn. You are not walking into a world of constant meat feasts around a fire. You are walking into a world where meat is rare, unpredictable, and often not even the main event. Anthropologist John Speth spent years studying the diets of hunter-gatherer societies, both ancient and modern, and his research kept pointing to the same uncomfortable truth. Meat was prized, yes, but it was inconsistent. Some days you get nothing. Some weeks you get nothing. Your body cannot run on nothing. So what fills the gap? Plants, roots, tubers, things you would probably walk right past without noticing. 50,000 years ago, survival meant knowing the ground beneath your feet the way you know your own kitchen. Which roots swell up fat and starchy underground? Which ones will make you sick? Which berries ripen in which month? This was not folklore. This was memorized data, passed down and tested against death. And here is where it gets strange. Researcher Amanda Henry examined the dental plaque of ancient hominins, including Neanderthals, and found something nobody expected. Trapped in that fossilized plaque were microscopic starch grains. Cooked starch grains. From wild grains, tubers, even legumes. This single detail rewired how scientists picture your ancestors' plates. Not spears and roasted meat alone. Root vegetables and grains, softened by fire, eaten alongside whatever protein the hunt provided that week. Could you find that food today, dropped into the same landscape? Only if you already knew what to look for. Picture yourself standing in a grassland at dawn. You are hungry, and everything around you looks either inedible or vaguely threatening. But scattered beneath your feet are tubers you could dig out with a sharpened stick. Above you, certain trees hold nuts locked inside shells that took your ancestors generations to learn how to crack. Around you, insects crawl over decaying wood. And yes, insects were food too. A dense, portable source of fat and protein that required no hunting skill at all, just patience and a willingness to overcome disgust. That disgust is modern. It is cultural. It is not biological. Fire changes everything, and this is where primatologist Richard Wrangham's research becomes essential. Wrangham argued that cooking was not a convenience your ancestors added later. It was a turning point in human evolution itself. Cooked food breaks down faster. It delivers more usable calories per bite. A raw root might barely sustain you. The same root, roasted over coals, suddenly becomes real fuel. Wrangham's theory suggests that without fire, without cooking, the human brain as you know it may never have grown large enough to ask questions like the one you are asking right now. So if you land 50,000 years ago with nothing but your modern instincts, your first job is not hunting. It is finding fire, or finding people who already have it. Without fire, half of what your ancestors ate would sit in your stomach barely digested, giving you a fraction of the energy it was capable of providing. With fire, the same handful of roots becomes a real meal, because you would not survive alone. Nobody did. This is worth sitting with for a moment because modern life trains you to imagine survival as an individual test, one person against nature. That was almost never how it worked. A lone human, however smart, however resourceful, was operating with a dangerously incomplete map of a dangerous world. Survival back then meant belonging to a group that already held generations of accumulated knowledge about the land. Which plants were poison, and which merely looked like the poisonous ones closely enough to kill a careless person anyway, which insects were safe to eat raw and which needed to be cooked first, where the water sources refilled even in dry seasons, and which ones dried into nothing more than mud and false hope. This knowledge was not written anywhere. It lived in the group, passed from person to person, tested against real consequences, refined across lifetimes you would never see. Without that group, without that inherited map of the landscape, even an intelligent, resourceful modern human would likely starve within weeks, surrounded by food they could not recognize as food. You could be standing in the middle of an edible landscape and still slowly die of hunger, simply because nobody ever taught you which parts of it were safe. Now, about the meat. When it came in waves, not steady meals. Archaeologist Curtis Marian's research on early coastal populations in South Africa revealed something remarkable, that some of the earliest reliable protein sources were not large game animals at all. They were shellfish. Mussels, limpets, and other coastal creatures that stayed in the same place did not run, and could be harvested at low tide with almost total predictability. In a world where a hunt could fail and often did, a rocky shoreline full of shellfish was closer to a guarantee. This detail matters more than it seems. It suggests your ancestors were not simply brave hunters chasing danger for protein, they were strategists. They looked for the lowest risk, highest reward food sources available and adjusted constantly based on season, geography, and what the land offered that particular week. A dangerous hunt that might fail was never going to be the backbone of daily survival. A predictable tide pool was. Now think about what large game hunting actually cost. It cost days of tracking. It cost the risk of injury from an animal fighting for its own life. It cost calories spent chasing a payoff that was never guaranteed. Compare that to wading into shallow water at low tide and pulling shellfish directly off the rocks with your bare hands. One of these strategies can fail completely. The other almost never does. If you had to choose which skill to master first, dropped into that world with nothing, the choice is obvious once you see it this way. So here is your actual survival plan if you were really dropped into that world. Find water first, because every reliable food source clusters around it. Find people second, because knowledge is survival, and one person alone rarely lasts long against an unfamiliar landscape. Learn which plants they eat and copy them exactly, because a mistake with the wrong root or berry could kill you within hours, sometimes without warning. Eat insects without hesitation, because your disgust response is a modern luxury you cannot afford, and it will cost you calories you desperately need. Take any coastal or freshwater food source seriously, because it is more reliable than any hunt you could attempt on your own. And treat meat as a bonus, not a baseline, something to celebrate when it happens rather than something to expect every day. Notice something else about this plan. Almost none of it requires strength. It requires observation. It requires memory. It requires the humility to watch and copy people who already know more than you do. Notice what this plan is really built on. Not strength, not speed, knowledge, the ability to read a landscape and know almost instantly what in it wants to keep you alive and what wants to kill you. That is the twist most people miss. You assume survival back then depended on physical dominance, muscle, aggression. But the fossil and archaeological record keeps pointing somewhere else. It points toward pattern recognition, toward memory, toward flexibility. The humans who made it were not simply the strongest. They were the ones who could shift their diet fastest when the environment shifted first. And that flexibility never left you. It is still sitting inside your biology right now. Think about why you crave fat and sugar the moment they are available, even when you are not truly hungry. That craving is not a modern flaw. It is an inherited survival strategy from a world where fat and sugar were rare, seasonal, and worth stockpiling in your body the moment you found them. Your ancestors who craved that ripe fruit intensely, who ate every bit of fat off a carcass without hesitation, were the ones who survived the lean months that followed. You inherited their appetite even though you no longer live in their scarcity. This is why a modern grocery store stacked floor to ceiling with exactly the foods your body evolved to crave can feel almost impossible to resist. Your instincts were built for a world of unpredictable food. They were never built for a world where the food never runs out. Every aisle you walk down is quietly triggering machinery that was designed for scarcity, not abundance, and no amount of willpower fully switches that machinery off. Even your sense of taste carries this history. Why does fat taste satisfying instead of neutral? Why does sugar hit your brain like a small reward instead of just another flavor? These are not accidents of modern food design. They are ancient signals, tuned over hundreds of thousands of years, still firing exactly as they were built to fire. You are not weak for craving them. You are, in a very literal sense, still listening to instructions written by people who never once saw a supermarket shelf. So when you picture yourself surviving 50,000 years in the past, stop picturing a hero with a spear standing over a fallen beast. Picture someone crouched at the edge of a river, reading the mud for tracks, remembering which plant killed a friend and which one saved a life, watching the tide for shellfish, waiting for the smell of someone else's fire on the wind. Survival was rarely dramatic. It was observant, it was patient, it was collaborative. And when you close that fridge tonight, without a second thought, remember what that convenience is actually standing on. Thousands of generations of people who did not have it. People who had to know their landscape the way you know your own street. People whose instincts, cravings, and caution are still quietly running underneath your modern life, guiding what you reach for even when you think you are simply choosing what sounds good for dinner. You open the fridge without thinking about it. Your ancestors would have given almost anything for that luxury, and somewhere in your body, you still remember why. The more we learn about the past, the better we understand ourselves. If this video sparked your curiosity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Phoenix Primeval for more fascinating stories from history, science, and human evolution. Thanks for watching.